This is TradeFlow News, bringing you relevant news and insights from around the world. TradeFlow News, enabling trade for SMEs and economies worldwide.
These are some of the key topics that we will be looking into in today's program.
First, let's take a look at the overnight headlines which are impacting the commodity markets.
Russian President Vladimir Putin said on Friday he agreed with an assessment by the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries that demand for oil will remain high. I agree with your forecast that demand for energy resources and oil will remain at a high level, Putin told Haytham Al-Ghais, OPEC Secretary General, at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. He cited the figure of 105.5 million barrels a day, OPEC's consumption forecast for 2025, and said that level will remain in the near future. He said Russia appreciated the depoliticized nature of OPEC and was prepared for further cooperation with the group.
Oil prices settled down on Friday as the US imposed new Iran-related sanctions, marking a diplomatic approach that fed hopes of a negotiated agreement, a day after President Donald Trump said he might take 2 weeks to decide US involvement in the Israel-Iran conflict. Brent crude futures settled down $1.84, or 2.33%, to $77.01 a barrel. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude for July, which did not settle on Thursday as it was a U.S. holiday and expires on Friday, was down 21 cents, or 0.28%, at $74.93. The more liquid August contract settled at $73.84.
Moving on to the top news in the energy sector.
A federal appeals court declined to throw out the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's renewable fuel standards for 2023 to 2025 on Friday, even as it concluded regulators failed to adequately assess the potential effect the rule would have on climate change and endangered species. A 2-to-1 panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit largely rejected challenges by environmental groups, refiners and a renewable fuel producer to fuel volume requirements that the EPA set in 2023 for corn ethanol and other biofuels during former Democratic President Joe Biden's tenure. The requirements increased the amount of biofuels that oil refiners must blend into the nation's fuel mix and set finalized biofuel blending volumes at 20.94 billion gallons in 2023, 21.54 billion gallons in 2024 and 22.33 billion gallons in 2025.
Qatar held crisis talks this week with energy majors after Israeli strikes on Iran's huge gas field, which it shares with Qatar, an industry source and a diplomat in the region told Reuters. Saad Al-Kaabi, CEO of state-owned Qatar Energy and the Gulf Arab states' energy minister, urged companies to warn the U.S., Britain and European governments about the risks the conflict poses to gas exports from Qatar and the increasing threat to the global gas supply, they said. An interruption to Qatar's liquefied natural gas operation could cut off around 20% of the global supply, which Doha exports from the world's largest gas reservoir. Next, we have the top news in metal markets. Copper prices rebounded on Friday after U.S. President Donald Trump pushed back a decision on U.S. military involvement in the Israel-Iran conflict, but gains were capped by uncertainty over tariffs and Chinese demand. 3-month copper on the London Metal Exchange was up 0.3% at $9,642 a metric ton by 1600 GMT. Earlier in the session, prices hit the weakest since June 13 at $9,558.50. Some metals moved higher with stock markets after news emerged that Trump will decide in the next 2 weeks whether the U.S. will get involved in the Israel-Iran air war and as Europe tried to coax Tehran back to negotiations.
China's overseas shipments of rare earth magnets halved in May from April, tumbling to their lowest levels in more than 5 years due to export curbs. Beijing said this month that it would speed up its approval process, a concession made after the US and China agreed to dial back trade tensions. In the meantime, however, industry sources say Chinese customs officials have become increasingly cautious about processing rare earth cargoes. This is particularly so for rare earth magnets because there is only a single code to cover magnets despite there being a variety of chemistries, said the sources who were not authorized to speak to media and declined to be identified.
We will now look at the top news in the agricultural sector.
Euronext wheat edged down from a one-month high on Friday as investor worries over U.S. intervention in Israel's war with Iran abated and traders assessed mixed weather for crops. September wheat on Euronext settled 0.5% lower at €208, $239.91, a metric ton. It earlier rose to its highest since May 21 at €210.50, surpassing a previous one-month top from Thursday. Chicago wheat also ticked down. U.S. prices had surged on Wednesday, when the run-up to a U.S. holiday on Thursday drove investors to cover short positions amid crop weather worries and uncertainty over U.S. action against Iran.
That is all for today's news on commodity markets. Stay tuned to TradeFlow News as we continue to provide you with more updates. We also invite you to follow us on Twitter at TradeFlow News, which allows you to watch our program on your mobile device or desktop to receive information from there.